Okay, so anyways, anyone here from the PTOS that was at our annual meeting, I think everyone knows that we had a pretty big epic fail with Microsoft Teams, and we were not able to actually do our annual speaker at the meeting. So today we are actually doing our speaker presentation, and it is with great pleasure that I can introduce to you Scott Jordan, who's the CEO of SCOTTeVEST. So welcome, Scott. And I was going to basically start off with getting a brief description of your past. So let me start by saying Scott Jordan co-founded SCOTTeVEST in the year 2000 with his wife, Laura. Scott remains intimately involved in every aspect of the business, from engineering the perfect pocket, overseeing the entire customer experience, maintaining, establishing relationships with factories and vendors, to the big picture fun stuff like determining the future of the company. Before founding SCOTTeVEST, Scott practiced corporate law at DLA Piper in Chicago. He received his JD from Case Western Reserve University with high honors, summa cum laude, and Order of the Coif. He published a law review article, which was cited by several federal appellate courts. He received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the Ohio State University, majoring in entrepreneurship. Scott is no stranger to media attention. He appeared on Shark Tank, Season 3, Episode 11, CNBC's The Big Idea with Johnny Dutch, Fine Living Network's Radical Sabbatical, as well as Japan's hit show, The World's Most Successful People. He has received a multitude of press in the past for his successful entrepreneurship, including several write-ups in Entrepreneur Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, and even several college textbooks. Scott also professionally speaks, for example, see his Google Talk at his link, Google HQ. That's a link that we'll provide in the email. He is also author of Pocket Man, the unauthorized autobiography of a passionate personal promoter, which chronicles his evolution from an unhappy lawyer to an amazingly successful entrepreneur. Scott is the co-author with Laura of children's books based on the real-life adventures of their late standard poodle, Margot, who became blind and deaf overnight at the age of 12. Scott's hobbies include hiking with Laura and their two standard poodles, Rhonda and Sabrina. Well, welcome, Scott. It's great to have you here. This time I think we got it right. And, just wanted to start off, I think I'll tell the audience what we talked about is we were going to talk about this kind of like in three parts, the beginning of how you left the big law and went into entrepreneurship and started SCOTTeVEST. Next, we would go into the patent side of it and trademarks too. And finally, we would conclude with your Shark Tank episode, which I think is something that's really fascinating. So starting off with Scott, I thought maybe you could tell us in the audience what got you to take that leap out of big law and into becoming an entrepreneur.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and apologies for the problems before. To answer that question, I went to law school because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and like so many other lawyers, and I thought, I just delay for 3 years that decision. And unfortunately, in my case, I did so well in law school that I was presented with the golden handcuffs from a very large firm, DLA Piper, to join during a recession, and I took the opportunity and practiced law for several years. And I found it very frustrating having to basically argue about condemnation provisions in contracts and things that were unlikely to ever occur at all. And I just really hated practicing law, at least the type of law that I was doing, which was real estate and corporate law, and was desperately trying to find a way to escape the law. And I was asked to join a startup firm called Next 50. This was just as the internet boom was really taking off, late 1998, 99 or thereabouts. And I took that opportunity and was commuting. And it's during those commutes and those travels back and forth to New Jersey every single week as one of three founding members of a startup, relegated solely to legal matters. There aren't that many legal matters of a startup necessarily. So I really didn't have terribly much to do. And I hated that worse than practicing law. But one of the things I discovered in doing so is that there was really no adequate clothing that was made to accommodate the things that people were carrying at that time. At that time, it was Walkman and MP3 players and Palm Pilots and a variety of other related things. And as a gadget guy, I was always frustrated with the pockets that clothing had. And but as an attorney, I thought to myself, well, there's no real opportunity necessarily to start a business based on pockets because there's nothing protectable. And it always, like so many young entrepreneurs at the time, or old entrepreneurs, the first thing you think of is, yeah, I'd like to start this idea, but unless I can be assured that no one else can copy me, what's the point? So I came up with the concept of incorporating third-party wires in clothing and filing for a patent on that. And just one day I was walking along in the airport with my headphones on, and the wire got caught on a doorknob, and it practically pulled my ear off. It's happened to all of us. And I literally got the earplug, and I thought, all right, I'm going to see my earlobe on the bottom of that earplug, and it's bloody and everything. And sure enough, my earlobe was not on it. But for a moment, I thought, that was the aha moment that, perhaps if clothing were designed to incorporate a manner of managing wires, that there would be a way to finally escape from the law. And with that, I filed for the patent and started technology-enabled clothing, which is the ingredient brand here, with SCOTTeVEST as a proof of concept, just that I formed while I was waiting for the patent to issue, and that's how I started.
That's fascinating. And did you have any regrets? Did you know instantly, hey, this is what was meant to do? Was there any hurdles when you
Oh my
first started?
God, like a gazillion regrets. I mean, all along the way. I mean, the stability of a paycheck from a large firm, or at the time a startup, and the risks that I took. If I had known then what I knew, I learned in the process, I never would have taken the leap. Having said that, I'm thrilled that I did, but ignorance is sometimes bliss, and in my case, it truly was. I will say that I like so many entrepreneurs, the initial basis, for starting the business and filing for the patent, and that overwhelming concern about the protectable property going into it was misguided 100%. And had I taken all that energy and budget associated with the patent and the enforcement thereof and the reissuance thereof and all the bits and pieces I think we're going to go into slightly, and focus instead on what I'm doing now and just making the best damn clothing with the best damn pockets, and letting people attempt to copy me if they desire, but just building that better mousetrap. And I would have been much better off, but I had to go through that journey, to figure
Yeah.
it out.
Well, your audience here, we're at the Patent and Trademark Office. I thought it'd be really interesting if you could tell us a little bit more about how the patent process worked for you, just the whole experience from beginning to end.
How much time you got?
We probably got a few minutes, but
all right, I'll try and get, it's really been through, almost every different level of it, so I won't get through it all, but I've been through it all. At first, I just wanted a quick and dirty piece of paper that I could turn to the world and say, I've got a patent pending, and I tried to do it myself, realizing quickly that it was a language that even as an attorney, I didn't understand. And even to this day, if I tried to read a patent, it's a different language. You guys all deserve, all the kudos for being able to interpret and read and review those things. So I didn't do a full search of prior art. that would be necessary to ensure that the patent was going to really uphold the test of litigation necessarily, like so many other patent applicants do, I'm sure you know. But I presented it to a law firm and I gave them the specific instructions. I just want a piece of paper that will scare people away and go from there. And they filed initially, for an international patent of sorts. There's a term of art that I don't know what it's called, but and then there was a change. I was advised that that was misguided, that we should really file for the U.S. first and then go back and seek international coverage separately. So I went through that. It was issued, partially much to my surprise because it's candidly, and enough time has passed. 22 years, the patent, I believe, is either expired or almost expired, or it's not really meaningful to my business anymore. But it does seem a little bit obvious, as we'll touch on later when we hit on the Shark Tank episode a bit. But when it got issued, I'm like, this is incredible. Now let's do what I set out to do, and that's start suing other people, that were already at that point starting to infringe on my patent. And I brought it I sent a letter out to one of the main infringers, and they wrote back with, oh, but what about this? And I brought it to my attorney, and then we went to do a reissuance of the patent to clean it up a little bit. So I went through that whole process, and all that while I'm running SCOTTeVEST and successfully, much to my surprise. Candidly, because I had no real intention of starting a clothing company. I had no real experience. Little did I know at the time that SCOTTeVEST was the very first clothing company to start online as its sole distribution method. Now there are many companies that are doing that. Now there were companies such as REI, LL Bean that would use the web as an additional distribution channel, but to us, it was the very, very, very first. So having gone through that experience, we went through, and I'm patiently waiting, calling my attorney up every 2 months. How's it going? And he would say, I'll talk to the examiner, but we can't bother them too much. I'm like, will you just give me the examiner's phone number? Let me talk to him. He's like, no. And I finally got it reissued, and then for some reason or another, I had to get it re-examined thereafter, and I'm not even sure what triggered that, but I got it reissued, then re-examined, and then at that point, I found a law firm that would represent me to enforce the patent and seek licensing deals with all the top apparel makers of the time. And the law firm was hired on a contingency basis. And like me, they did not do much research as to what was in prior art. And when they started sending out a bunch of letters to the largest apparel makers, they started getting back some examples of prior art. Much of which I was at that point already familiar with, from the military to astronaut suits and the like, none of which necessarily, were spot on to what we were doing. But the law firm got cold feet at that time. And in the middle of having just sent out complaints and at the beginning of litigation, discovery starting, they said, we don't see the value in this case anymore for us. We're out. And I said, that's putting me in a kind of a tough spot. You can't just quit as things, you're really, so as an attorney, given the fact that all I wanted at that point was the credibility of a license agreement, I personally stopped everything I was doing and was negotiating separately with, I think, 20 separate companies represented by the all white shoe firms, having just lost my counsel in an attempt to try to rescue, some semblance of credibility with a license agreement at a nominal amount, effectively ranging from as little as $5,000 to as much as $20,000, or nothing, and an acknowledgement that the patent was valid and a perpetual license back at them. And that's kind of the end of the story. At that point, SCOTTeVEST was, 8, 9 years old and was generating real profits, and it was an exciting venture. And I was no longer focusing my attention on the patent enforcement.
So actually, it kind of brings another question. Like when it came to the development of the name SCOTTeVEST, I think you were telling me there were some trademark issues there too, correct?
Oh yeah, ridiculous. Yeah. Well, first, when I wanted to started, I wanted to call it eVest. It was like electronic vest, and the
Mhm.
basis was a travel vest or a fisherman's vest. That's where we started. That's what a lot of people use now, when they travel. But they have all those exterior pockets, and you look goofy, and you make a determination. You're going to wear a fanny pack and have the functionality. And what our special touch was, we made the pockets mostly internal and using all sorts of innovative, and I use innovative loosely, as it relates to a pocket, but they were. I mean, they're little
Yeah.
subtle things. This pocket in particular was really hard to develop. It seemed simple, but just to balance the weight and not have things sag uncomfortably or rub against you uncomfortably. There's a lot of innovation that goes along into it. But so I landed on SCOTTeVEST, Scott's electronic vest, because I couldn't get the URL eVest, and in doing so, I used the italicized E, to separate the Scott and the eVest, and sure enough, I get a letter from IBM, who was utilizing heavily from their lawyers, IBM's e-business solutions, you might remember.
Yeah.
And so my lawyer said, you're going to win. They don't own the italicized E, but we'd recommend that you change it if you're not in love with the E necessarily. And sure enough, I changed it, but I made a lot of hay out of it. I sent out a newsletter. Get your last SCOTTeVEST with the famous IBM E, before it's discontinued, and did a press release and everything else. So that's the E. And then when I moved to Sun Valley, little did I know that Scott USA was based here in Sun Valley at the time, and they thought somehow that I was moving here to confuse customers buying ski poles and goggles and bikes to think that somehow SCOTTeVEST was, based in the same city, was somehow trying to confuse customers to believe that that we were somehow related. And rather than picking up the phone and calling me and saying, "Hey, listen, can you adjust the font a little bit, or this, that, and the other thing?" They just simply served me with a lawsuit. Later explained to me that they were so concerned because I was a lawyer in a past life that I was going to work my magical legal powers on their business people sitting down in a conversation, that it would just be unfair. So instead, they decided to just sue me. So I was in federal court and mediation, and we actually had a settlement agreement, and it cost me a ton of money. And they actually said, "Well, we want you to pay our legal fees too." And I
Oh,
pretty much told them to pound sand in not very polite words, because they chose the forum. I would have been happy to change the font so as not to confuse people. It wasn't my desire to begin with. So, and there's been, every time I name a product, honestly, people come after you in clothing, and it's got to be ranging. We had a jacket called Stealth, a stealth jacket that, and someone claims to own the word stealth. And
yeah. That's incredible.
oh, do the research on that guy. He's a true troll. And another jacket called the Standard jacket. Someone claims they own the word Standard. We have a hoodie called the Chloe, named after one of our Standard poodles. And apparently there's another brand called Chloe that to this day Facebook will not even allow us to use. So I've gotten a taste for pretty much most areas involving trademark and patent as a result.
Yeah, that's amazing to me that you've really been through the ringer with this kind of situation. With the patent process, did you find the office was difficult? Did you find the attorneys on the other side difficult? Obviously, I think that's the case. I
You
mean, I
know,
think our audience would like to hear about that.
because I was so shielded from the office themselves, it was just it was just this black box. It really, it's unfortunate because when I ultimately did have some correspondence with some of the patent attorneys, I found them very pleasant and very helpful and real human beings. But because my attorneys, felt the need, understandably. I mean, God knows you don't want to be dealing directly with all the attorney's clients, wondering status and the like. But, on occasion, I think it's helpful to know you guys are working hard. You have a lot of pressure, a lot of things on your desk, and you'll get to it when you get to it. And you're not ignoring us. I mean, otherwise, I felt that my attorneys were unnecessarily delaying and oftentimes I wouldn't use the word lying, but just it's rare to find an attorney in my experience that will actually respond in a timely fashion to an email, a phone call. For some reason, they feel they have a license to do things on their clock. And I just find that aggravating. So,
I could certainly see how that's frustrating. But, I think we got to go to the next stage of our interview. And for our audience, we're going to probably try to include a link in this famous, in my opinion, Shark Tank episode, certainly one of the most memorable ones that I've seen. I was wondering if you could tell us about the whole experience of getting on Shark Tank, why you did it, how it went down, and the after effects of it.
it's funny you mention it because I think today or tomorrow, I'm not sure, is the 11th anniversary of when my episode aired. And to this day, I think it's one of the most memorable episodes, not just by my own statement, but if you watch it, you will. It's season 3, I think episode 11.
That's what I have.
And if you Google it, you might be able to find it. But because of obviously copyright, the full episode you might have to actually buy. It was the longest single episode. I mean, I think I was on stage, for about 50 minutes, and the episode was 24 minutes or thereabouts, and it's just a really long time. So, long story short is, I always thought it would be a great promotional opportunity to get on the show. It's an epic show. I was a huge fan. Even at season 2, I thought, oh my God, this would be absolutely perfect. I'd love to have them as investors in SCOTTeVEST. So I applied, and much to my shock and surprise, within minutes of sending my initial email to one of the producers, I got a reply saying, we'd love to talk with you, really excited about it. And through a series of emails and video Skype chats, they said, okay, you passed the first part of the application. We'd like to have you fill out the complete application and go on to the next stage. It was multiple stages. So I get the contract was like a 50-some page contract. Very, very one-sided, as you could imagine, which I would have expected, but very deep in page 44 in the very fine print, I discovered a clause that says, merely by appearing on the show, you give the producers 5% of your business, whether or not a deal airs, a deal is made or not, if it airs. So in exchange for the publicity, the producers get a finder's fee. And I was completely unaware of that. At the time, SCOTTeVEST was doing, close to $10 million a year, and 5% was a valuable piece. And if you've watched the show, you don't know what the edit is going to be like. It's not always advantageous. So
Right.
at this point, I'm faced with a choice: either give them, call it $1 million in value in exchange for nothing. They don't pay a nickel for that option, or pivot. And as a lawyer, I thought, I'm going to pivot. Instead of pitching SCOTTeVEST, the name of my clothing brand, I came back full circle and pitched Technology Enabled Clothing, which owns the patent rights, and I control all of the revenues, and the revenue stream from technology-enabled clothing, and thought, this would be a great opportunity to start, pursuing the patent and licensing strategy that I had intended really from day one, but for the accidental success of being the first online clothing company to start. And they said, well, we think you're going to just use that as a backdoor in an attempt to talk about SCOTTeVEST. So I had to sign a side letter agreement that ensured that if I dared utter the word SCOTTeVEST, that would trigger the 5%, as was intended initially. And I thought, okay, at this point, you're so deeply invested in the whole process that you'll do whatever is necessary to make sure you get that airtime, with the intent of hopefully getting some investors, but candidly getting the PR value of 7 million eyeballs on the first viewing and the reruns that happened thereafter. So I was able to negotiate that, and yet when I came on stage, the very first thing they started talking about was, oh, wait a second, we don't want the patent rights, we want the retail company. Now, imagine yourself, you're appearing in a very intimidating, stage, and they're higher level, and the lights, and, everything is intended to make you feel intimidated. And you didn't sleep the night before, and you've been waiting 5 hours for my turn to do my pitch. And all I wanted to make sure is I didn't forget my pitch. And the moment I get out there, all they're doing is trying to negotiate on behalf of SCOTTeVEST without mentioning the name. So it got highly contentious, and it was always about, at this point, patent rights. And I tried to make the point of, what would Levi's be today without a patent on the rivet? Just another jean company that's out of business. I mean, Levi's is Levi's because of patenting the rivet in whatever year is on everyone's belt loop. To this day, their patent is listed. What would Velcro be without the protection that Velcro has? What would Gore-Tex be? I mean, these are all ingredient brands related to clothing, but yet because it's clothing, and because it seems somewhat simplistic, yet not so simplistic that the patent office didn't see some uniqueness and novelty in the way in which we were doing it, putting holes in conduits and pockets in a fashion that enables you to control wires. And so as patent attorneys or as patent professionals, I think you'd really get a kick out of watching that show. But if you don't know the genesis of it, that if I merely mention the word SCOTTeVEST, okay, they started bidding on SCOTTeVEST and they wanted SCOTTeVEST, but they didn't mention the name. And if I merely countered, it would have triggered that clause. So it was highly contentious. I told Cuban he was out the moment he sat down, and I pointed at two of them and walked off the stage and said, I don't need you. Because I knew the longer I stood there on that stage, the more likely I was going to say something really dumb that they would use to make the controversy of the show appeal to their audiences, and they're only looking for ratings. As a result of me being on the air, Cuban said he would no longer appear the next season because he recognized that no other companies that had any real value would agree to the terms of that contract. And he wasn't willing to waste his time sitting there listening to pitches for mom and pop, businesses unless they were seriously interesting. And they've since removed that clause.
It really actually, when you told me that story for the first time, it really gives a very different dimension when you look at that episode, because, I went back and watched it and I was just like, it's a game changer to me because it completely changes the way how you handled yourself on stage and everything else like that. And there was a lot of money at stake, and being in perpetuity, that's a long time to be owing someone money. So
I mean, I guess technically they own 5% of technology-enabled clothing. They haven't released those rights for any of those prior entrepreneurs, but, they haven't come after me or said anything. But yeah, in my mind, I had to be a presenter, and I was also producing and editing the show, as I was standing there. And I'll never forget, after I did my presentation, I walked off the stage, and I came back, and I said, listen, that's silly. That's for TV. I came back and shook everyone's hands, and one of them wouldn't shake my hand. Robert, he was so offended, he wouldn't even shake my hand. And then they make you meet with a psychologist to make sure you're mentally okay.
Wow.
Uh, I'm getting a warning here about something about the audio. I'm assuming everything's okay on your end. Can you
Yep.
confirm that?
We're
Okay.
good.
All right. So I had to meet with a psychologist, and the first thing she says is, "Listen, I want you to know that there's a chance it won't air. So, don't worry, because, these are young entrepreneurs and it's very intimidating." And I turned to her, I said, "Did you watch that? Were you in the room?" And she says, "Of course I watched that. I couldn't sit here and counsel you if I wasn't watching what had occurred. And I just want you to know I'm here for you." I said, "Okay, if you watch that, what are the chances that's not going to air?" And she said, "0."
That's something. So Scott, I have to ask, like, would you do it all over again after it? It seems like you got a lot of publicity.
No, it was, my wife will tell you, our website unfortunately crashed the night of it. It didn't help sales. Our sales that night were no better than the prior Friday night. All it did was help ratings. They didn't show the part of me unloading everything in my vest and talking about how great the vest was. It was an argument between one person against five, and the one person who, against all odds, came off smarter, more intelligent, handled himself better than all of the other sharks. And as a result, the hate mail, because I didn't treat the beloved sharks with the respect that everyone felt they deserved, was extreme. Having said that, 50% of the emails and the responses was literally people said, "I stood up and clapped when you told them they were out in my living room." It was just awesome to see someone stand up for themselves in that circumstance. So, would I do it over again? Yeah, I would have, but I would have gone about it completely differently. I would have pitched SCOTTeVEST. I would have made a deal and not upheld my deal, because rarely do those deals that close actually on TV actually close. The sharks will look at it and they'll try and change the terms of the deal. Some of them do close and some of them are very good, but it's a television show, and I would have played it differently. And I literally took it very, very seriously. I practiced long and hard. But if you're going to try to raise money, there are many other better ways to do so than going on Shark Tank. Shark Tank is not where you go to raise money. Shark Tank's where you go when you want to get some publicity first and foremost. And to say otherwise is just utterly silly.
So, all right. Well, that's definitely, I think, I really think the audience, if they haven't seen the episode, knowing the backstory now, when you see it, it will give it a completely different dimension. And to me, it's fascinating because that was huge. And if you can Google the episode and SCOTTeVEST, and there's a law firm that even mentioned that after that season, they removed that clause from the contract. So, I mean, I haven't verified that, but I'm pretty sure that sounds like it's pretty accurate.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true.
So anyways, I got a couple other just kind of like last questions before we leave. One of them that I had on my list was, why did you pick Idaho as your headquarters? I'm looking at your background. I'm kind of like, enough said there, but
yeah, that's the ski mountain, Mount Baldy, right behind us. We got
that's beautiful.
You're only seeing half the mountain because the clouds, but so that's a great question. We moved here almost 20 years ago, and the thought was I wanted to move to a place where I ultimately wanted to retire. And the typical pattern that I was watching with people older than me is you find a place you like, you buy a small little condo, you find a way to get 2 weeks a year, 2 weeks turns into 3 weeks, and 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a summer. And then finally, when you're as old as I am, and as much gray hair or older even, candidly, I'm 58. When you get to be 65 or thereabouts, you finally move to where you want it to be. And instead of going through that 20-year process, I just decided, fortunately with my wife, to just pick up and move, and 20 years ago, and see how it all unfolded. We chose Idaho because I wanted a ski resort, and we went and visited, all the other ski resorts that were under consideration. And my wife from the beginning said, if we're going to do this, there's only one place love to live, and that's in Sun Valley, Idaho, possibly Aspen. But number one, and I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. There's got to be another place. So much like so many men in marriages, I didn't believe my wife, and we had to go and spend all these vacations trying to figure out, which resort was better, until ultimately I came around to understand my wife is usually right, and that's how we ended up here.
Sounds like an ingredient for a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
But the next question I had for you is, what is the most valuable lesson you have learned as an entrepreneur?
Perseverance. I think any successful entrepreneur, doesn't take no for an answer. They learn from no's, and they keep on keeping on. I mean, this has been 23 years for us, and to focus on what's important. I think we'll come full circle, and the most valuable lesson, and this might be contrary to what keeps you guys busy, is the patent is not the most important part of a business. I think that if I could have all the time and money and aggravation I spent, if you go in the Wayback Machine and you look at some of our early versions of SCOTTeVEST website, you'll see patent pending or patented. Every third sentence was the word patented. And I just dreamt that, if I just patent a great idea and then I just charge licensing fees, then game over. I don't have to work. There's no getting around the work. You've got to work hard, and when you believe in something, it's a lot easier.
Okay. Two more questions for you. One is, how do you name your products?
Well, there's an extensive process. My wife, does most of it. Laura, the naming at this point. We used to name, we started with the eVest 1.0 and the 2.0, giving people, a desire to always upgrade, sort of like software. And we went through that. The men's stuff, we kind of used iterations. We start with a product called the Evolution and turned into the Revolution. And we always, whenever we're into any sort of naming, we go to your website to make sure that no one has got that name. And much to my surprise, no one had that term pocket science, which we trademarked among other things. But the women's products I find a little more interesting. We name those after our dogs. So if you look at, there's the Rhonda, the Chloe, the Lucy, and yet we don't really refer to those stories in the naming, in the product description. I think that women in particular would love to see a picture of the dog that their product was named after, but it's kind of a bit of inside baseball, if you will.
Gotcha. For the last question, this is kind of an open-ended one. How do you come up with new ideas for innovation?
I see what the marketplace is doing generally, and take, copy other people. I mean, candidly, I mean, I have refined how to make a pocket, where to place a pocket, how to design a pocket so that when you bend over, things don't fall out. All these things that are unprotectable, and much to my surprise, many clothing garments, if not all, do not incorporate in their designs. It shocks me. Anyone could buy any of our items and see what we're doing, aside from what may still have some patent protection on the wires, which is less and less relevant. Obviously, not necessarily because of Bluetooth, but more because of the power. It wasn't necessarily just for the headphones, but you put a battery in one pocket and a wire internally that leads to another pocket to charge your devices. But I'm finding devices now have much better battery capacity. But for example, one of my favorite products, we use magnets on the sleeves to remove the sleeves very easily. And I forgot who was doing that, and it was brilliant. And then they were concerned, however, after I bought that product, I got a notice from their lawyers saying, it can cause problems with pacemakers, and they discontinued use of that product or magnets in their product as a result. We made a determination that the likelihood of problems with pacemakers, which require a really strong magnet, not the little magnets that we use for that purpose, was a risk that we were willing to take, and because we did the testing in the background. But that's a good example, another good example of a lawyer getting involved in something, as a result of the highly litigious nature of the world, and ensuring that innovation didn't make it into things. But we came out during the pandemic. We came out with a really clever mask that had pockets in it that was capable of being used beyond the pandemic, and that was a fun innovation. It wrapped into itself, but I don't think that there are. I think we've really pretty much have done all the iterations that we can on innovations. Now it's just more colors, different styles, and anything else that would typically go into a clothing article from any other brand.
Well, I can tell you as a gadget person myself, I'm definitely going to be buying one of your vests. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Scott, I just
It's not
wanted to
just
tell you.
that, it's a full line of clothing, by the way, pants, and focusing on the premise of more better pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, I'm going to be, you'll see me by placing an order. On behalf of the Patent and Trademark Office Society, Scott, I really appreciate your time. I did want to say one last thing to the audience. So Scott, we give a speaker's fee to Scott, and he donated his speaker's fee to Mountain Humane, which is, I believe, an animal shelter. Is that correct in Idaho?
Yeah, it's a no-kill animal shelter, and it's a fantastic cause. And I want to thank you all for making that contribution on my behalf. Thank you.
And I just, again, on behalf of the Patent and Trademark Office Society, thank you again for attending and giving us this great interview, because it's really quite honestly been very fascinating. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay.